Hello, and welcome to the first episode of AD Movie Club. My name is Justin. This is a show where we attempt to take a look at specific films through multiple personal lenses and try to understand its rippling influence. This episode is dedicated to the 2008 film Tokyo Sonata by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. First, I'll be talking to photographer and podcast host Yoshino, followed by composer, performer, and professor Amirtha Kidambi from New York City. And finally, my good friend Rue Story, who is a collaborator on an upcoming film project. All of these people come from very different backgrounds with very different angles that they view the film from. The one thing that they all have in common is that they are all part of the Asian American diaspora. This podcast is going to be a little bit different than your typical Artist Decoded episode. I am often on the move and very rarely get to stay in one place for very long. So the sound of this podcast will reflect that. Some of these conversations will be recorded properly in a studio. Sometimes I'll chime in on a Zoom recorder. Right now I'm recording in the corner of my kitchen. I should say that this episode, along with all the other episodes, will be chock full of spoilers, so if you haven't yet watched Tokyo Sonata, now's your chance to pause the podcast, go watch it, and come back to this. Okay, onward.
Okay, so it starts out with the patriarch of the family. He works at this menial job that's seemingly of high status, but completely vague and meaningless at a major corporation, and he is made redundant and fired because they have a newer, younger, and faster worker from China coming in to replace a lot of the upper management. So he gets fired, and instead of going home and telling his wife, he thinks to himself that I'm not going to address this. I'm going to just pantomime having a job until I get a new one. Getting a new one is a lot harder than he thinks because his job was so meaningless that he basically has no skills. He has no marketable skills to all the jobs at the same level that he would like. So he has to resort to, essentially being a maintenance person and cleaning up a local mall. And this whole situation, this secret life of his, kind of catalyzes and exposes everybody else in the family's secret life. The wife's longing to get away, her wanting to escape her daily routine in which she's not at all respected or understood or acknowledged, and the sons kind of are of the new generation, and they have their own form of trying to self-actualize and escape. The oldest of the two teenagers decides he wants to go fight for the Americans in the Middle East against his family's wishes, and the younger son is kind of like a rebellious person, but not because he wants to be, but only because he simply questions authority. All he does is question authority and want to play piano, and that's it. And in the end, he's the one that brings his family together because he transcends the society norms and kind of brings his family together through his piano playing. His piano playing is something that his father does not want him to do, probably because he can't afford the lessons. And Kenji, the youngest son, takes these lessons in secrecy using his lunch money that his mom gives him every month. His dad, after finding this out, explodes because his autocratic authority had been questioned, and even if he sees that he's in the wrong, he refuses to go back on what he said because he needs to have the veneer of authority because he's the patriarch of the family. And then the movie kind of ascends into chaos and absurdity, and then finally wraps back at home again, and then finishes with the youngest son playing piano publicly for the first time, and the family kind of realizes his talent, and then they are able to heal after all this stuff is exposed. Yeah, tell me what your first experience with the movie was. How did you react to it?
Well, my first experience with the movie, I think about the time period that it was shot in, and that was around, I guess it was around 2007. So this is right before the crash of 2008. So there has to be something to be said about that. I think it's interesting because it does talk about patriarchal values and specifically about this Japanese man, and also talks about the Japanese working class and how much work is valued within that society and that capitalistic society. And it also talks about shame a lot, and the shame of losing a job and then having to hide that from, and it wasn't even just him, the main character, that was hiding it. He ran into his, I guess it was like a college student or a college friend of his. And he also lost his job and basically came up with this whole plan how he would make his cell phone ring automatically about 3 to 5 times a day or so that it would, or no, maybe it was like 3 times an hour. What was
5
it?
times an hour, yeah.
5 times an hour.
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. So he would have the appearance of being important and working, and but in actuality he was going to, there was this parking lot where there was a lot of homeless people in there, and he was getting, I think it was like some sort of rice porridge as sustenance, because he couldn't afford, I'm assuming, regular lunch. And probably because it was something for him to just do in general. But it was interesting, like the main character's job title, I think, was like director of, what was it? Director of what?
Of administration, I think.
Yeah, director of administration. So he essentially was the director of all the assistants doing clerical work. And so I think it's interesting too, just the idea of hubris and male patriarchal hubris, and how that was, just a big part of the whole film. And it was interesting too, just how, it kind of reminded me of, in certain ways, of that movie Wildlife, how there's these social contracts that we have, and how once those social contracts are broken, so essentially, there's that nuclear family dynamic, and how there's a husband and a wife, and in the traditional nuclear family dynamic, and in a patriarchal dynamic, the husband is the one that works and provides, and then the wife stays at home and does the cooking and cleaning and those sort of tasks. And how, similar to Wildlife, how when those social contracts are broken, essentially, what the reaction of the wife is, or what sort of existential crisis each person goes through in that state, and how they react to it. So I found that to be really interesting. And I found that to be really relevant because we're also in an era where there's a lot of talk about patriarchal ways, and how, I guess, an aversion to it as well.
Well, you mentioned shame earlier, and I tend to think this movie is predominantly about, if it's about anything, and which is about a lot of things, seems to be about the phenomena of duty and shame, and it's a very Japanese thing, in at least in my experience. My mom's Japanese and you're Japanese, and we're both American, so we're kind of disconnected in a way from that culture, or at least it's been filtered through the lens of Americanism. But how do you deal with that, or how do you interpret the duty and shame, and do you sort of, is there any way in which you are able to relate to it?
I think, I guess a way to relate, if I can relate in any way in terms of duty and shame, it would be in the religious sense, in a religious context. And that I think part of that shame comes from, I mean, it's embedded within like a Christian monotheistic religious sense. But I'm curious. Well, I'm more so curious about where, like, you probably know more of the history of why maybe it's post World War II, and I mean that's what I can assume. But just where that sort of embedded context of cultural shame comes in to play with shame culture within Japanese society. You probably know more about that than I do.
Well, I mean, it's a really, really complex thing. I know some, and it's through. It's been something that's been building through like history up into modern day Japan, and it's a very patriarchal society, and it's gone through a lot of violent eras and globalization, and then kind of sort of like closing off of society as well. So when this movie takes place, this is after World War II. I mean, this is 2008, 2007, 2008. And we're kind of exploring two different generations, right? One is post World War II, like for our terms, like baby boomer, right? And then the next generation. So, and I think that actually can be illustrated in the self-actualization thing with like the parents who are stuck in these kind of routines and are stuck as this cog in this much larger societal machine, and the young man who's separated from all the havoc that America has wrought on Japan is actually going to try to escape that system that's built to go actually fight with the Americans in the Middle East. So it's like this weird thing where his parents are totally against it because they had to live through this thing and had to essentially be a part of a much larger whole to kind of rebuild Japan as a world power again. And so I think they have a different relationship to that, and the son feels like it's his duty to self-actualize, and he's actually rebelling against his parents who were part of this thing that was meant to raise up Japan again, which is all this hyper-corporate, almost hyper-westernized way of being. So I think that doesn't so much answer the question as it does like illustrate a point in the movie where that's somewhat explored. But I think his shame is very deep in a lot of cultures and a lot of societies, and even though this movie is very Japanese based, it's in a lot of the themes that are universal, like familial duty. That's a thing that's kind of in a lot of ways like cross cultural, like familial duty here, breadwinner, housewife gender roles, things like that are like put in place because, I mean, they're ways to structure things, and they're
also survival mechanisms.
Sure. And as like you feel like this responsibility to other people, shame almost inherently comes with that, in a lot of ways. And the sense of like your place as the head or have power of your family, but you're really nothing in the grand scheme of things, is kind of a weird friction, again, that can create shame. And where there's duty, there's also shame if you can't accomplish the duty, right? So, yeah, I don't know. There's lots of reasons why that exists there, but there's also universal reasons why it exists. So, again, that doesn't answer the question so much as it illustrates part of the phenomenon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The first part of the movie is kind of this exposing of all the structural problems that exists within that family dynamic that is catalyzed by the loss of this job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which in a weird way reminded me of how the pandemic, maybe a bit of a stretch, but also exposed all the structural problems we've been having that we've in a lot of ways know exist, but never have they've been illustrated so thoroughly as when something like this happens, this catastrophic event that upsets the relationship of society, right?
Yeah.
So the familial dynamic in Tokyo Sonata is kind of like a microcosm for that for me. So when I was watching it now, like a few nights ago, rewatching it for this, I kind of felt that and noticed that, and I couldn't shake that parallel. How do you feel about that sort of thing? Like, how do you feel about realizing those connections?
I want to answer that question, but I want to understand what sort of parallel you saw between the pandemic and the occurrences that are happening in Tokyo Sonata.
Okay, well, I mean, so everything is very systematic in Tokyo Sonata. Megumi, the kind of matriarch of the household, is home all day, cleans all day, and then prepares for the children and the husband coming home. And she's prepared food already, and she says, "Welcome home" every time they come back. It's almost like a musical theme. It keeps on reoccurring, but all her work, she like makes donuts. She does these things to try to make her family happy. They come home, and no one cares. They don't even want anything. They just are in their own head. They're dealing with their own thing. But it's the structure that's there every day. It's like the thing you do. No one helps her, and it slowly eats away at her. But she continues because that's the structure, right? It's like, this is how you live. This is life now. And when it's normalized, it becomes normal. And the same thing with the patriarch of the family, who goes to work, does his thing as he finds out, gives him no useful skills. It's like just a pattern he does every single day. And when he's proven redundant because what he does is inherently meaningless to him.
I see what you mean.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and so
I see.
all the structural issues that exist were made evident by him disrupting the foundation of this.
Initially, I thought you meant, well, I mean, I think you mean a lot of different structural issues, but initially what I thought you meant is structural issues within the American government. But I think that it goes,
sure.
that definitely, but I think it goes much deeper than specifically that, right? So we're talking about structural issues politically. I mean, we can just use America for an example, but I could imagine that there were a lot of people during this pandemic, and speaking about just America, but how I would assume that there would be a lot of people that maybe are working class people that are going through existential crises because the skills that they build up maybe in a work setting aren't exactly of personal interest, right? So when you're stuck at home and you haven't essentially trained yourself, I just use that word just because it's relatable for me, or built the habits rather to do things of personal interest, then when you're just stuck at home and you're confronted with that, and you're not able to put that energy in other places, right? So then, and also there's a lot of these personal truths that I would imagine that come out. I mean, I don't have the statistics with me right here, but there's definitely an increase in like domestic violence, and which could probably stem from people constantly lying to themselves about certain things and then lashing out. And sorry, that's probably not like an exact correlation, but do you see what I'm trying to get at a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's interesting in the movie. The only person who wants to return to the central dynamic of the power structure is the patriarch of the family. He wants to quit feeling the shame of not being the breadwinner and restore balance by having this job he can feel his self-worth coming from, right? Not realizing that he's essentially replaceable. That's the thing he's coming to grips with, that he is completely replaceable in the job. But the reason why he wants to return to that is because he has autocratic power in his household. In this small area, in the small arena of his life, he has total power. The matriarch of the family is fantasizing about getting a car and escaping. The youngest son wants to find piano as an outlet to explore himself, and the eldest son is trying to escape the country entirely because he thinks that's what'll find him some sort of freedom. So everybody's trying to get their own self kind of realized, and the father does it by being like this ruler over his family. So, like for instance, that's a lot of what we see in the world around us, where we have like the people in power, the people who want to keep power because it makes them have value in the like presence of meaninglessness and replaceability, and other people who are oppressed by that power, who are now seeing all the holes and how this like veneer of safety is completely obliterated. Maybe these people don't have the have it all figured out. Now they're like fighting back and wanting to self-actualize. And that's where you find this huge friction and social upheaval. Some people want to exploit that, and some people just want to self-actualize, feel whole, or have some kind of equality in life. And there's a constant like restless searching for that, I think, in human nature. And that's what we see in the movie, and that's what we see in the world around us, whether it be governmental structures, political structures, familial structures, things like that.
You're able to string that together really well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I mean, I love this movie. I'm just like passionate about this movie, and I think there's this it's so full, as with most great art, is like it's full of all these things, and it's a good reflection for a lot of things, and it's a good jumping off point to kind of notice certain things around you that are maybe failing or whatever beautiful. So
this is your favorite Kiyoshi Kurosawa film?
Hard to say favorite. It's either between this and Cure, which is something I'm actually we're going to get to in the course of this movie club. But I think this movie just shows like his breadth and diversity, because he was predominantly seen as a horror filmmaker, thriller horror filmmaker. And this, to me, expresses a lot of the same societal issues he's exploring there, but in this family context. And you can almost, in a weird way, if you wanted to, see it as a horror movie. It's not framed that way, but it has all those same things: the feeling of meaninglessness, loneliness, all those things that are explored in his horror movies. So, yeah, I think it's a great inspiration, especially from a guy who came from like B movies and porn.
Kiyoshi Kurosawa?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, he started in pink films, which are essentially like softcore porn movies, and then made like B-movie horror movies, like television movies, and then over time built up his name, and then is now like one of the foremost directors in Japan.
Wow.
Yeah. It's just a different world over there too. You don't see a lot of people jumping from porn to like winning like the con or anything like that.
Well, I can't think of anyone that has done that.
This episode of AD Movie Club is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Every day, Mubi premieres a new film, each one thoughtfully handpicked from new directors to award winners. Beautiful, interesting, incredible movies, there's always something new to discover. Mubi is a service that was hugely inspiring for the creation of this podcast. In fact, I rewatched Tokyo Sonata on Mubi in preparation for this. It's a great platform, and I highly recommend giving it a go if you want to expand out from the typical stuff you'd see on Netflix or something. You can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/Artist Decoded. That's MUBI.com/Artist Decoded for a whole month of great cinema for free.
You, like myself, are mixed race, half Japanese, half white, and you watched it with both of your parents. Your dad thought the movie was kind of, I guess, like weird and silly or something.
Yeah.
And your mom, explain your mom's her reaction to it.
Well, she was just quietly taking it all in, and I could see that the more brutal parts of it were definitely affecting her, and she was also like, both her and I were in tears at the end, and my dad wasn't watching it at the end, so. Yeah, and also probably should point out my dad is the one who is white, and
right,
as usual, but sometimes I feel like it's pointed out.
Right. So, your mom, do you think she like related to the Japanese culture, like the oppression of or the repression of the culture, or do you think it was more just a general familial drama kind of like connection to the characters?
It's hard to say. I mean, even from just my perspective, watching her navigate in the family dynamic, I can see the kind of oppression she faces as a Japanese woman. But I don't know if these are things she sees entirely. Like, I see that she really just serves the family and like tries to take care of everyone, which is kind of similar to the way that the mom is in the family dynamic. She's like the center and the caretaker and making donuts for people, and they don't even want them, and stuff like that.
Do you think your mother feels underappreciated in the household?
I think so. I mean, I feel like maybe it's just from my perspective, because I think she deserves a lot more appreciation for all that she does, and I think some people might be taking it for granted because it's just become the norm at this point. So I don't know. From my perspective, she definitely deserves more appreciation.
And you get along with your mother pretty well?
Yeah, we're very close, and only getting closer as I am in a transitionary period of this whole gender situation. So
so speak about that a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, just that your where you're at in your life and where you've come from. And I know we spoke a little before the call was officially recording about you kind of relating most to the Kenji character and the kind of like questioning and self-actualization kind of in the family. So if you wouldn't mind talking about that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. I think, I related to the Kenji character, the youngest brother, the most because he's like kind of the most rebellious in a way, and just sort of actually questioning the norms and like the prescriptions that are being given to him in a similar way that I grew up as a kid and would just sort of I didn't even question the norms. I guess I just was dressing as a boy, or like however it felt most comfortable, and I would hang out with the boys, and I was definitely not interested in the more feminine things at that point. Even though there were pressures to like dress like a cute girl or something like that, but I think in that way I definitely related to the Kenji character the most, and
Pressures from who? Just like society at large, or your family more specifically?
I would say both, definitely both, but like I would feel the family pressures more directly because they would just say things, directly be like, "Oh, it'd be cute if you wore this. You'd look good if you wore this," or like, "You're not gonna look attractive if you don't wear this." Right.
And we'd also spoken a bit about your mom doing it as out of a point of ignorance, of course, like not understanding the full breadth of what it is that you were experiencing, but that your mom would kind of try to steer you in a way to protect you a little bit from ridicule or like pain or things like that. Can you talk about that a little bit and how you were, you realized and were able to reflect on that? Like, at what stage do you kind of feel empathy for your mom, at least like looking out for you, even if it was the backwards way of doing it?
Yeah, I think it was kind of around that, puberty, teenage time, and I remember I would dress sort of like masculine for a girl person, and I remember my mom being like, "You can like do these things if you want, but it's gonna be harder, and it's definitely not gonna be as easy as if you did dress like more feminine, or if you're into more feminine things." And so, I mean, she was just kind of being honest about the way I was going to be treated in the world, and looking out for me, and like, but also reinforcing those norms, but definitely just looking out. in her own way. So
Right.
yeah.
And so, and you guys have remained close through this whole transition process, and
Yeah, definitely. We've only gotten closer because, I mean, I had top surgery 2 months ago, and it's a very vulnerable experience because you can't really do much of anything right after, like, especially during the first week. And she was my caretaker through that process and had to, like, drain my bulb fluid things that I had to dump every day that was building up from all the excess fluid in my chest. And yeah, so I mean, we definitely got closer during that time.
right. And it's like again, drawing a parallel to the movie. It's like when Kenji was playing, like his talent was truly revealed. Who he actually was actually revealed. The thing that was actively being repressed by the family.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the family was able to have some pride and some feeling of worth, and then was a ground for healing of the family structure.
Mm-hmm.
So do you see like a direct parallel between that? Is that kind of what brought the tears on a little bit? Is that like some kind of relating, or was it just that you were caught up in it?
I think I was definitely caught up in that story, and that was just such a beautiful moment in itself when he's just like playing this masterful piece, and there's it's just like a big pause, like you could just feel it, like everyone's stopping to watch and take it in. So I was definitely caught up in that, but after reflecting on it a bit, I mean, I definitely relate to that moment as like a very transitionary moment for myself, and like the way my top surgery has gone, it's just so, you can't like deny that I've just had this whole process done to become myself. So it's just become, I can feel the meaning in that. It's just sort of like this before and after moment that happens with your family as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So you definitely feel like a difference, like in all facets, the before and after. There's like a transformation of the people closest to you and around you as well, I'd imagine.
Mhm. Yeah, there's just much more recognition, appreciation, and I feel like they're seeing me for me now, instead of, they're really just looking at my identity and just seeing like the whole weight of it. Yeah. And
Great.
I have a very tight-knit family, so it feels even more significant and impactful to have that support.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I mean, if there's anything else, any other points you wanted to make about the film, or how you felt about it, or anything like that, things you didn't like about it, anything like that, I'd love to hear them before we shut down for the call.
I guess, I mean, I know this call's been like a little bit more, this talk has been a little bit more serious, but I also was just like laughing like constantly throughout it, because it's like
But you laugh constantly anyway.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's my like sort of socialized and social anxiety sort of habit. But it also just towed that line of just sort of like really messed up and hilarious so well, I think, which is like something very Japanese in its own way. So it did have me laughing, but also questioning, should I be laughing at this? I don't know. But that was like something I really loved about the movie too.
Like, can you give us an example of one of those moments? 'Cause I've got a few I can think of right off the bat.
Yeah. Definitely like when he's stumbling through the trash and just falling like constantly, and he's like he's trying to like run from his own shame, and he's like, and then he ends up getting like hit by a truck, and you're like, I don't know if this is just hilarious or like really messed up.
I mean, it's like so absurd, right? I mean, he's like he runs all night.
Yeah, he's all night.
He's like comatose on the side of a road.
Yeah.
It's like, Jesus.
And that was after his wife had just seen him in the like whole cleaning bathroom cleaning uniform in the mall, I think, who was also being kidnapped in the middle of a kidnap. So it's like, oh my god.
Yeah, and he was being exposed for, like, all his lies were being exposed, and then he was so shamed he had a total opportunity to rescue his wife.
Yeah.
And instead he literally ran for what appeared to be 8 straight hours.
Yeah. Just so funny too. Oh my god. Yeah. That's
pretty wild.
One of those. Definitely just that's the main one that stood out to me.
Yeah, I mean that's where it kind of all culminated. That's the part of the movie that was really going off the rails.
While prepping and researching this episode, I was kind of drawn into the chaotic nature of this movie. The way it lays the groundwork early on in the film, in the first act, with this kind of slow, sort of, almost what you'd consider like an Ozu-esque sort of family drama, with people boxed in their homes, and this sort of, intimacy with everything. And the way the movie warped and changed over time over the following 2 acts are very unique and strange, and kind of its own thing. It veers into absurdity. There's a lot of humor. There's even some parts that are kind of scary and violent in a way. And then it finally comes back home after all this and kind of reunites the family, and there's this sort of period of stability in place. There's this huge arc that all of the characters make. And when they arrive, it's finished off with this beautiful piece of music played by the youngest son, and it kind of, you feel the change, and it's kind of materializes in that one scene at the very end. And to me, that whole structure, very much like in the title, and it should be obvious, but is written and structured like a sonata, with the exposition, the development, and then the recapitulation. If you were to look these elements up, you would see that everything that I was discussing kind of follows this very specific form, musical form. And it's no accident. I'm sure Kurosawa wrote it this way. Even if you don't understand music or you're not music literate in any way, outside of being a fan, you can see this sort of form emerge in different kinds of art. It's kind of a beautiful structure to hang drama on. Anyway, Amirtha describes that much better than I do.
Hi, Justin.
And she goes into it in pretty great detail in the course of the next conversation.
Yeah, so sonata form is a very, very specific classical form. And, the kind of the broad strokes of it are that there's an exposition, which you could also, happens in films or any kind of narrative, and then a development. And the development is usually a section where there's you go through key changes, you move away from whatever the home key and the home theme are. It's usually the area where something gets kind of complicated, and then the recapitulation at the end, where you usually return to something about the exposition, but it kind of reappears in a new way. It's recontextualized somehow after going through this big journey. So Beethoven is really known for using these things as an actual metaphor, like a little hero going on a journey, going through some turbulent things in the development. So it's definitely it's both a musical structural form, but it's also been seen as sort of almost like a narrative form as well. And it was, developed more because of Romantic literature and whatnot, and all the kind of Faustian journey stuff. But in this movie, I could definitely see, I think that's specific to the name. I'm sure that was part of calling it sonata. But the other thing that's interesting about it is the piece that he plays in the end is Debussy. It's not a sonata. Debussy is actually somebody who completely abandoned those types of forms and like went way more for expression, like deep kind of expression, subconscious expression, deep, like dream expression, things that were not so sort of clean as they were in the classical era. So it's kind of interesting, like even with the name, you know, these characters are like going through psychedelic journeys, like quite experimental, quite like definitely like I associate Debussy a lot with the subconscious. And then of course there's the connection to like Japanese culture because he was a French European who was like, you know, kind of like obsessed with Asian cultures and maybe to the point of fetishizing them and defining himself and his music through, you know, Asian musical forms and all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I think that recapitulation at the end, like when they're having dinner at the end, right?
Well, it ends with them at the recital, right?
The recital, but there's one more, like, you know, obviously there's when they all come back to the house.
Yeah, so
like,
that's right before the recital, I think. Like everybody comes back home, and you know, they've gone through this insane journey. Right,
because the recital is like months later, right? We're assuming. Yeah, so that's like that. You know, I feel like it feels like it's going to be this clean kind of classical form because, like at the beginning, it's sort of set up like you said, like a kind of quintessential family drama. This like middle class family drama, you know, dealing with kind of the repercussions of global capitalism and you know, themes about like maybe masculinity or all kinds of things. And it feels like you know what you're getting. Like it feels like, okay, this theme is going to go through some kind of key changes. Maybe there will be like a variation on this theme or something. But it kind of veers off into like a really maybe something more modernist where not to like overly like use this metaphor so heavy-handedly, but if I were to look through this lens, like, you know, then Kenji, the kid playing Debussy, he plays Claire de Lune, right? Yeah. It's like it's totally it's something that really doesn't have that kind of formulaic structure. Although I think now that I think about it, I think Claire de Lune is in some kind of loose sonata form, but it's like reinvented, let's say.
Well, I think it might be a profound decision to end it with something like that, where it's because like in a couple of the other conversations I've had on this movie, I was speaking kind of to the effect of this hyper-westernized system coming about after World War II, which is what the parents were born into, the trauma of like baby boomership but in Japan, right, where they're trying to restructure and re-emerge as this power. And then the kids are essentially a generation removed from that and are rebelling in their own ways. The older brother in a very like ignorant way, but like hyper-westernized and fetishizing the West in this weird way, and so much that he's going to fight with the people that obliterated his country like a generation previous.
Right.
And the kid who's just trying to, all he was doing is, Kenji was just asking questions and trying to become who he actually was and find his passion. And as a result, it elevated the family to a point of actual healing. Yeah. And like exposed all these things. So it almost feels like maybe Claire de Lune in a weird way breaking the sonata form, but also having this weird hyper-westernized, almost reverse like Eastern fetishizing thing is maybe a profound transformation in a weird way, and troubling in some ways, but also a beautiful way to end the film.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, I've only seen these two films of Kiyoshi Kurosawa, the Cure and this one, but it seems like he's a very deliberate filmmaker. Yes. I don't think any of those choices would be made for pure aesthetics or it seems like there's so many layers to this movie. Like both of these movies sat with me for a very long time. And I keep thinking about like very specific moments. They have such emotional flavors to them.
Right.
And I almost feel like, Debussy in that way too, like, these are really simplistic kind of music historian, art historian, like after the fact naming movements, but impressionism is what Debussy gets associated with. But that's exactly like kind of the same vibe, like, and it's like an impression, like leaves you with these sort of all these kind of vague feelings that you sort of have to sort out through your own sort of subconscious. And there's a lot about the subconscious, I feel like, in both films. Like, I feel like you don't quite know if, like, something is in the real reality or possibly potentially in a subconscious reality or, like, a fantasy or something in both
or like
movies.
Elevated expressionistic in a way.
Right, yeah. So I feel like, yeah, Debussy's a interesting choice at the end, and it just leaves you with that. You have that sound at the end, and that's it. You don't have words anymore. And I feel like that's an interesting way to end the movie. It doesn't end with like another scene of the family. It's just the piece, and that's it.
It's like this. It's almost like this extreme going from like hyper confinement, just the way it's shot, to everybody's boxed in. Like everybody in the small Tokyo house is very much in their own boxes all the time. And when they go out of the house, they go into a stream of other people as if they're just entering into traffic. And at the end, there's this really bold decision where nothing's like super close or anything. It's just this kind of medium wide shot for the most part of just him playing, and you just have to sit and watch him play the whole piece.
Right,
and,
which is also very unusual in a movie to see a musical performance from beginning to end. I can't think of that many movies with that.
No, and it's unadorned. It's not like you're like there's a close up of the kid's face emoting or his hands playing. It's really just that one shot and then like one or two reactions of his family and his piano teacher, and that's it. No clapping, no nothing, which is just like such a bold decision and how quiet it was, but also wide open. It feels like at the end of the movie, it feels like there's a whole realm of possibilities that could happen now, where at the beginning it feels like there's no hope whatsoever,
Right. And it feels like it's the first time you see them as a family unit anywhere outside of the home. Like, I can't think of another scene where they're together, but they're in this other context, and that moment. And just like the way, it ends without applause because it's this kind of jury situation, but the parents kind of make an emotional break by like going up to him and receiving him and showing him some kind of emotion that we haven't seen throughout the movie, which again, like you said, opens up this like other possibility. But yeah, it's what an end to such an insane. I mean, the film, like, forget it. There's the burglar and driving into the ocean. Like, there's the scene with the father, like with the cash, like running and tripping all over himself, like all over box. I mean, it's weird because if you just think about the beginning, even if you just thought about the beginning and the end, it sounds like some other, like a more like in that sonata form idea. There's like an exposition, a recapitulation. It kind of feels like clean and logical, but the development through the middle is like, it's completely insane, But it's like because there's not one theme going through one development. It's four people going through these extremely particular kind of individual journeys, and it's super messy. And what a film!
Yeah, really beautiful. And there's this theme too, and I won't keep it too much longer. But I just wanted to get your take on this theme of really only one person wanting it to return to normalcy for the whole time, and that is like the patriarch of the family, right? So much so that he pantomimes his previous life, where everybody else is essentially fantasizing about escape in their own way, you know?
Right.
Whether that means the wife going and window shopping for cars she'll never buy, or having a driver's license just to have the feeling of opportunity in her pocket, or the son who's just like, or the teenage son who's just kind of just obnoxious, but also just trying to escape in this crazy way. And then eventually, while he's out there, discovering maybe it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, and he's going on a different journey, completely detached from the family, while Kenji wanted to kind of retreat into himself and just find something there, or just ask simple questions as to why things are the way they are. And then the guy in power just wants to keep it that way because he's kind of the autocrat of the family.
Right.
It feels like political structures in a way, but
exactly. It's like any patriarchal power structure, right? So
yeah,
he's trying to maintain the status quo, but by the end, he kind of, it seems like he makes some peace with that and is able to let go in finding some kind of way to do this job, which, you know, is a job that I think he would have never considered for himself as a cleaner before.
Mm-hmm.
But find some satisfaction or some peace in it, and find some peace in, like, you know, realizing that he cannot control, you know, his family and what they decide to do. Just relinquishing some control, that there's actually such a burden on him.
Right.
You know, like, it's like with that kind of authoritarian order also comes this, like, this intense burden, and yeah, it's like he can finally kind of let go of trying to be in that role, like that, which is an imposed role on him by the society. You know, that he has to be this way, this kind of violent. Like, the other scene that that really stuck with me is, like, after Kenji tells them that he's been, you know, taking his lunch money or whatever for piano lessons, and he pushes him down the stairs, right? Like, it's really violent. It's really like this sudden, intense outburst of violence that it's pretty shocking, and it's like, oh, you know, it's because the son does not respect his authority. And you can kind of see in the aftermath, like, it's almost like the father is, like, just playing the role. Like, it's almost like he wishes that wasn't what he did, but he has no other form of expression other than violence because of the, you know, the way the society is also structured.
And I feel like also he did that. It's all stemming from him not being allowing himself to tell his family he simply can't afford it. You know?
Right. Yeah. The pure financial anxiety. But and it's like the period when it takes place is interesting too, because it's like, I mean, I guess the movie comes out in 2008, right? But it's, at least, I guess, I don't know if this is the lens, but it's sort of, we know that to be a global recession, which we're going into, and so there's just a lot of, everybody is incredibly anxious. It's a very anxiety-producing film. But yeah, I mean, it's so different. Well, it's different from, we've talked about that too, like, it's different from Cure, just in tone and, you know, vibe and everything, but it's actually, in terms of, like, the experimental structures or kind of the expressionism and all these things, he has a style, like
he's a horror filmmaker even in his family dramas, you know. But yeah, it's amazing. But I had one more question for you, and I'll let you go, but maybe this is too loaded to get into. But I was wondering, you know, if you had any kind of connection to Kenji in particular, because you and I have known each other for a long time, and I kind of witnessed you coming into your own as a musician from someone who is desperately striving to become that, and growing up in a Asian family that maybe had its own sets of baggage like any family does. I remember that being an incredibly hard transformation in the beginning. Do you in any way relate to that in any kind of deeper personal way? Did you connect to the movie?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's really funny because just right before this, I finished this short essay for a chapbook that my friend Patrick a Japanese American saxophonist in LA, is putting together for a record, and you know, I kind of touched on 3 friendships and relationships that I had with people of the Asian American diaspora, but how complicated, how different that is, and sort of when we became friends, you were my first boyfriend, which is crazy.
Hello, secret boyfriend.
Hello, secret boyfriend. Secret, exactly. Also secret boyfriend. So I kind of wrote about this. So I just was revisiting some of exactly what you're talking about, where I had never met somebody who was, visibly Asian American and whose parents were artists and who was encouraged to do art. Like, I had never heard of that before. Like, that blew my mind. And I had the opposite. And so, like the Kenji character, I saved my Baskin Robbins money to buy my first acoustic guitar, this kind of shitty Takamine guitar, and that was a big rebellion for me. Or I never had a music lesson until I got to college, and it was such a fight, every step of the way. I mean, I would say up until maybe 5 years ago has been a fight. And so, it was they had a certain expectation for me. They had a certain kind of anxiety that comes with this sort of model minority, especially in the immigrant experience. And that's, I guess, where our stories are different as first or second generation, and different histories, different traumas, but trauma nonetheless. And still a lot of, I feel in a way, maybe identity wise, we've found other areas in which the struggle feels very shared, and there's a lot of resonance. But at the time, it felt wow, we're just coming from these totally different universes. The idea of being encouraged to find yourself and do your thing and do your art, and then for me, to just be so suppress everything about yourself as an individual and just take one for the team and be a doctor.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back then too. My mind was blown in a different way, because to me, you were so clearly already you were fully formed in your voice in a weird way, but it was an active internal struggle and repression to not even allow that voice to show itself.
Oh yeah, very painful.
Very painful. I mean, as residual pain for myself, having to witness this struggle was really upsetting, because you could tell that your all the talent was there, and the drive and passion was clearly there. It was just the internal barrier set up by this trauma that you have just growing up in, that was kind of the not the I won't say that it was a problem, but it also made you very strong too in the end. So
and I would say it wasn't just the family stuff, right? That's part of it, and that's also, I feel, a fairly common experience now that I know a lot more South Asian and Asian American artists, first generation especially. It's pretty common, when I talk to people. But I would say the other thing was just purely representation wise. Not only are you told in your family that you shouldn't do this, but also you look around, you don't see it anywhere. And I remember you introduced me to, I mean, we were fully geeking out on Akira Kurosawa at the time, and film in general, and checking out a bunch of music. But you specifically showed me Vijay Iyer and Rudrash Mahantapa, these two South Asian jazz musicians who are now, I guess, colleagues. And it changed everything for me, because it was the first time, and MIA, I think, had just that same year had kind of had a big record, and it was sort of the first time I even could imagine that this was a viable path. So it was a lot of things, but I think that's where, I don't think just representation, just like blanket for the sake of it. It's got to be. I think we have enough people now who are making really high quality work that it's not just representation. It's like telling all these new stories with new voices and in complex ways. So it's an exciting time.
Okay, everyone, thank you for listening. And next month's episode will be on Ozu's Tokyo Story. So let's watch that. And yeah, I'll see you next month. Bye. The opening song of the podcast was written and performed by Double Wish. All other music was composed and performed by yours truly, Justin Hopkins. Thanks again.